Good morning, dear learner. Today we are going to begin a new and very important topic in our research methodology series. The title is the classification of research. Important thing is based on method. This is the third lecture of this series. With special focus on this lecture is experimental research. In the previous lecture, we discussed the analytical research. Important thing is where we analyze the existing data to understand the relationship. Analytical research is based on first important things. We collect the existing data, and on the basis of existing data, we go for any kind of the conclusion. So this is called the analytical research. Now we move the one step further into a more advanced scientific process and scientific method, and that is called the experimental research, which is considered one of the most powerful method in research, in which we manipulate different kind of variable to find out the cause and relationship. Experimental research is about the establish the cause and effect relationship. In this method, the researcher actively control and manipulate one variable. Important thing is to observe its effect to the another variable, just like we have an independent variable. To find out the effect of the independent variable on dependent variable. In simple words, we try to answer the questions. What is happen if we change something? Something an important thing is okay, what happens if we change something? Because we change the or training times, so what will happen in our performance? We change our duty times, so what will happen? For example, in the field of physical education, if we want to study the effect of strength training program, for example, which is related to the physical education, so the study the effect of strength training program on muscular endurance. So we divided the student in two different groups. One group follow the training program, that is called the experimental group, and the other group we don't give any kind of the training, that is called the control group. After a certain period of trainings, 12 week or 24 weeks, we compare the result to see actual effect of the training. So this type of research is generally or widely used in the field of physical education and sports sciences, because it provide a clear scientific and reliable evidences about what work and what does not work. Important thing, just like we go about the physical education and sports, so we prepare a training program to reduce the body weight. So what actually is this program is work or not to reduce the body weight, and after 12 week or 24 week. The important thing is this is the type of the experimental research, and experimental research is all about the establishing the cause and effect relationship. So let me start the experimental research method. We already discussed about the type of research methods. Just like we already discussed the descriptive research, analytical research. Now we will discuss about the experimental research. So today we begin our discussion on experimental research, which is one of the most scientific and powerful method generally used in the field of physical education and sports science, and especially in social sciences and sciences also. So experimental research refers to a type of research in which the researcher manipulate one variable, that is called the independent variable, to observe its effect on the another variable, that is called the dependent variable. So why keeping the other factor is controlled? The important thing is we have the one variable independent, one is dependent. So we can change in the manipulated independent variable and find out and observe the effect of the changes in dependent variable on the dependent variable. Just like the sports performance is depend on skill, fitness, all these the independent variables. So we can improve the skill, we can improve the physical fitness, and find out how these changes effect on the output. Output means the performance, that output means a dependent variable. So two type generally variables. Independent variable means those are affected on output variables. So one output variable is called dependent variables. So main aim of the experimental research is to establish the causes and effect relationship. In a simple terms, the experimental research answer the question just like what happen if we change particular factors. For example, we change some things, So what happened after that in the output? This is just like the performance in cricket. So we reduce the training times. What will happen on what type of the effect on the performance? So these type of research is called the experimental research. This is the flowcharts in which we giving a develop the or understanding about the experimental research in a very short. The first important thing in the experimental research is to identify the problem or formulating the hypothesis. This is the first step. To identify the research problem and a review of related literature to formulate a clear and testable hypothesis. The important thing is the first to establish the problem, and next they establish the hypothesis on the basis of limited evidences through the review of related literature. Next important thing, the select the variables, because we have different type of independent variable and dependent variables. To find out which variable is output variable, that is called a dependent variable, and which type of the independent variables. So independent, we can change independent variable and try to find out their effect on the output variables. After that, we go for the select and assigned subject. The important thing in that type of research is the select a suitable sample size from the population and randomly assign the subject to experiment and control group. So we divided two group, and one experimental group and one control group, and one group means treatment group, that is called the experimental group. Next is the design the experiment. Which type of experiments the researchers implement, just like to try to find out the changes in independent variable, find out the effect on the dependent variable. So plan the procedure, tool, material and condition, decide the experiment and control group. So this is the very important section in the experimental research. Next is the conduct the experiment. After to design the proper experiment, and after that the execute of this experiment. Just like if you go for design and training program of the rehabilitation program of ACL injuries, tennis elbow. So you design a specific training program to rehabilitate of tennis elbow injuries, treatment of tennis elbow injuries. So, first you design, and after that you execute to the patients, and after the executions you find out the some amount result. So through these all process we collect the data. So measure the dependent variable for both group using the reliable instrument procedure. So there is an important thing in experimental research. We collect the data for control group and experimental group for the first baseline with the help of the valid, reliable tools and method and procedure, because research is a systematic, scientific and plan process. Next is the analyze the data to use the appropriate, proper statistical technique to find out the reliable results. Next is the interpretation and report result. To interpret the result, after that interpretation we draw the conclusions and discuss their implication, and after that we should prepare the specific type of report, what kind of this of training program is useful or not, it should be implemented on the general population or not. The next important thing in the experimental research, because experimental research has some key features. The important first feature is the manipulate the independent variables. We already discussed the in experimental research we have at least two type of variables, dependent and independent variables. So dependent variables means output variable, and independent variables means in which we can manipulate through the or experimental protocol. So first we manipulate the independent variable and find out the effect of independent changing, we'll find out the effect on dependent variables. Second key feature is control of extraneous variables. So many variables there are effect on the performance, so we should control on that. Use of control group for comparison. So we should take in the parallel group, this group is control group, to find out the changes find in your research. It should be based on your protocol or not. So this is the very important factor. Next is random assignment of subjects. So we should select the sample and we should randomly assign in control group and experimental group. This type of research, just like we discussed about here, the experimental research has the greater accuracy and objectivity. The widely used in the natural science, sports science, education, physical education, psychology, and health sciences. Next important thing is how you understand about the experimentals. What actually means of that? So now let us understand about the simple meaning of experimental research, which is core concept in research methodology. Experimental research simple is a scientific method because the research is always scientific, planned, a systematic method in which a researcher they manipulate the one variable known as the independent variable that is called in order to observe its effect on the another variable that is called the dependent variable. The simple the experimental research is that we have two type of variable, dependent and independent variables. With the experiment or with the procedure or treatment, we manipulate the independent variable, and after that we try to find out their effect on dependent variable. All these process is called experimental research. This means the researcher actively introduce a changes or change and then studies its impact. Next important thing is it is used to establish cause and effect relationship. So the main purpose of experimental research is to establish cause and effect relationship, because we change the manipulate of the independent variables and we try to find out the effect on the output variable, that is means dependent variable. So it is establish the cause and effect relationship. It is means it help us clearly understand whether a particular factor is responsible for a specific outcome. The important thing because the outcome is based some specific factors. So we try to find out the or understand whether a particular factor is responsible or not through the experimental research. Next important thing is conduct under the control condition, because it is very important, because this is experiment always conduct in a control condition. So another important feature this is the experimental research is conduct it in the specifically control condition. So the researcher try to control all other variable so that the results are accurate and reliable, because we try to find out the changes, find out the effect of changes, the one variable to the others, but so many other factors are also in effect on that. So we try to control the other factors to find out the accurate and reliable result through the experimental research. Next is the frequently used in sports and exercise sciences. In the field of physical education and sports, experimental research is widely used, especially in exercise, physical therapy, in sports biomechanics. For example, just like if we do the exercise of aerobic training program effect on reduce of body weight, so many researches and conduct on the basis of experimental research design. So student, my dear learner, the experimental research help us move from the assumption to scientific proof. Simple is the process. You have some assumptions, you have some hypothesis, and through this is the journey from the assumptions to scientific proof through the experiment, making it highly valuable in improving the sports performance and training method. How you can define the experimental research by the different authors, just like based on the giving your definition. So now let us look at the standard definition of experimental research. It's widely acceptable in the field of research methodology. The experimental research is seek to determine the cause and effect relationship through manipulation and control of variable. It means this definition highlights some key points. First, experimental research is mainly concerned with the cause and effect relationship, which means the causes and their effect to the others, to find out the cause and effect relationship. Its meaning, it helps us to understand how one factor influences the other. Important thing, the one factor influence the others. So through the experiment, try to find out and to establish the cause and effect relationship. Second important thing that is involved the manipulation of variables, where the researcher deliberately change the independent variables and try to find out their effects. Third important thing is emphasize the control variable, because the important things we ensure, because the researcher should ensure that the other factor do not interfere with the results. We should go for the reliable results. In the slides, we will explain, we will discuss about the some objective of the experimental research in relation to the physical education. So now let us to understand the objective of experimental research, which clearly explain which type of research is conducted. So the first objective is to determining the cause and effect relationship. This is already we discussed, just like the experimental research help us to identify whether a particular variable is responsible for a specific outcome, because one variable is also be affected to find out the cause and effect relationship. Next important thing, the test hypothesis scientific. Important thing is hypothesis. Hypothesis generally just a researcher hypothesis and null hypothesis. It means there is we set the null hypothesis to test. An important thing is what is hypothesis. The hypothesis is assumption and intellectual gaze by the researcher. But important things, the gaze of this is hypothesis come from. This is the hypothesis come from the some basis on some evidences. But important thing behind of it to establishment of hypothesis is the assumption which is based on limited evidence. The limited evidence we collect with the help of the review of related literature, and we reach in some conclusions, and on the basis of limited evidence we make some assumption that is called the hypothesis. So through the experimental research we test our assumptions, and this is the journey from the assumption to the fact. Next is the evaluate the effectiveness or intervention and treatment. Sometimes we have the different type of treatment, sometimes it's different type of experiments to find out the effectiveness of it. Just like if you go for aerobic training program with height therapy to reduce the body weight of the obese populations. So through these process, we try to find out this effectiveness is exist or not. The experimental research help the researcher to determine whether the treatment be giving the any kind of the program, any kind of interventions, effectiveness or not. The researcher apply the treatment and observe its effect on the performance, on health or behavior. It's help to identify which method produce better results. Next is to develop scientific law and theories. Experimental research plays a very important role, especially in the field of physical education and sports sciences, to develop the laws and theories. The experimental research helps the researcher to develop scientific law and theories through repeated testing and observation. We go for the repeated tests and observation, and after that we reach a conclusion and establish and theories and fact. When similar results are found again and again, important thing is the same result found again and again, that is means strong scientific principle can be established. These theory help to explain and predict different phenomena scientifically. So this is the process, this is the objective of the experimental research. Here is some key elements of experimental research. First important thing, the independent variables, dependent variables, control group, and experimental group. All 4 points play very important role in all their experimental research. Just like is easy to understand, this is the key element of experimental research, which are essential for designing any kind of experiment. So this is first element is independent variable. This is the factor that researcher manipulate or change, because the independent variable means these the variables affect directly on the performance, just like the cricket performance. This depend on his fitness, depend of his skill, depend of training time, depend of diet, depend of psychological factor, depend of behavior factor. So all these factors is called the dependent variables. So the dependent variables we can change, we can manipulate on these variables through the experimental result to find out the effect of these variable on performance. If we go for the through this statistical analysis to find out significant relationship. For example, in physical education, a specific training program like strength training or interval training can be independent variables. Next is dependent variables. This is also called the outcome being measures. It is means outcome variables. So it means the performance in the player of performance is output variable. That is called dependent variables. It's depend on independent variable, just like training, skill, style, height, body mass, weight, fitness. This is the independent variable. So this is the outcome that we measure to see the effect of independent variables. So dependent variables always output or output variable, outcome variables. For instance, they improve just like in muscular strength, endurance, speeds, all are dependent variables. Next is control group. The third element of this is the control group. We've divided the group of independent group of experimental group of control group, and that is the control group. So what is exactly the control group in the experimental research? So this group does not receive any experimental treatment. We just take the baseline data. After the experiment, we collect the post-experiment data, but we cannot provide any kind of experiment or any kind of treatment on this group, and is used for the comparison. It helps us to understand what will happen without any intervention. Next is the experimental group. This group is called the receiving the treatment, and it means treatment group. The fourth element of the experimental group, this group received the treatment or intervention that we are testing. The result of this group are compared with the control group to identify the actual effects. Just like if we want to study the effect of yoga training program on flexibility, so one group of the student practice yoga, and while another group does not perform the yoga, which means this is called the control group. The flexibility score measure before and after program will show the effects. So show the student these element, independent variable, dependent variable, and control group and experimental group form the foundation of any experimental research and ensure that the study is scientific, reliable, planned, and systematic. Next thing is the characteristic of experimental research, because the experimental research having the different kind of character. Now we'll explain the characteristic of experimental research, which make it one of the most scientific and reliable method in research. The first characteristic is manipulation of variable by the researcher. In experimental research, the researcher actively change independent variable to observe its effects. So this is the important characteristics. The researcher actively change and manipulate the independent variables. One important thing is to find out their effect on the output variables. Next is the presence of control group and experimental group. One group received the treatment, that is called the treatment group. One group, other groups not receive the treatment, this is called the control group. So while the other does not, it means the allowing for accurate comparison and better understanding of research. This is also conducted under the control condition. This meaning the researchers try to keep the other variable constant. This ensure that the observed change are only due to the independent variables. So this is the very important points in experimental research. Next is randomization. In experimental research, always involve the use of randomization to reduce the biasness, because the participants are randomly assigned to group, independent group, experimental group, or non-experimental group or control group, so that each individual has equal chance to be selected. Next is the under the control condition. This is the very important characteristic of experimental research is this is the conducted under the control condition. The main important thing is the researchers try to keep the other variable constant to find out the actual effect of the independent variable on the output variable. This ensures that the observed changes are only due to the independent variable, due to the change. This is called the experimental research. This is the very important characteristics. Next is high internal validity. Important thing is the experimental research is provide in the research is high internal validity. This means the results are trustworthy, showing the true and causes effect and relationship. So, dear learner, these characteristics highlight that the experimental research is a controlled, systematic, and highly accurate approach, widely used in the physical education and sports sciences to test the training method and improve the different kind of performance. Here we discuss about the some type of the experimental research. One is the pre-experimental research, second is true experimental research, third is quasi-experimental research. So the three type of experimental research design. So this is the pre-experimental research design in your screen. You just one group pre-test post-test design, that is called pre-experimental research design. So select first group, so select a single group of participants. Next, we giving the conduct the pre-test, measure the dependent variable before the treatment. Next, we giving the treatment or intervention, apply the treatment and intervention to the participant, and after the complete the treatment, we measure the record the data once again, and after the analysis we compare the pre-test and post-test result determining the effect, and after that we go for the conclusion. So pre-experimental design is we take the only single group. First we recorded the data and we giving the experiment, and after the we record the data, and after that we compare the post data with pre data and find out the effect of change from pre to post. Next is a true experimental design. This is second type of true experimental design. This is most scientific and reliable, generally used in the field of experimental research and sports and physical education. It's include a randomization, control group, manipulation of variables. So for example, students are randomly divided into two group, control group and experimental group, and they find out the effect of a training program is studied. So this design provides strong evidence of causes and effect relationship. So this is a true experimental design, in which design the select the first in the participants through the we collect the select the participants. Next is randomization assignment, because we select the control group, a experimental group. So randomly everyone has equal chance to select the experimental group or control group. So after that pre-test. So we have two group experimental group, second and control group. So first we record the data of variables which we selected for the research, and after that we giving the treatment interventions programs, apply the treatment intervention to the only the experimental group, and control group receive no treatment or usual treatment. And after the duration or complete treatment or experiment, once again we collect the data, that is called the post test on both control and experimental group. And then after that we can analyze the compare the pre-test and post-test result within group and between the group to determining the effect of treatment. And after that we reach a specific of conclusion, draw a valid conclusion about the effectiveness of treatment. So this is the process of true experimental research design. Third is quasi-experimental research design. This lies between the pre-experimental and true experimental research design. It includes the manipulation of variable but lack of full randomization. For instance, usually already exist group like two different classes and applying the training program of one group. So the student or my dear learner, these design mainly differ in the level of control and use of randomization. The more control and randomization we use, the more accurate and reliable result will comes. Important thing is your randomization increase, your control group increase. It is means your the reliability also research increase. To understanding these type will help you choose the appropriate design for your research in physical education and sports sciences. The quasi-experimental design means the lack of full randomization. Just like you see in your screen, the quasi-experimental design. Here first we select the group, and after the assigning the group, assign one group as experimental group and other group of control group. It is means the assigning the group, there is no randomization. So this is the lake in this process. And we collect the data, that is called a pre-test, and we giving the interventions, that is called treatment program, the experimental group, and control group not receive any treatment. And after the treatment or intervention, we collect or record the data once again. And pre and after the post data collection, we go for the comparison, pre-test and post-test result within group and between group to determining the effect of intervention. And after that, we reach a specific conclusion. So design is simple is here. This is the experimental group, record, treatment, and record the data. And control group, record the data, no treatment, and after the specific time records once again. So this is the same process, but the lack of randomization in the quasi-experimental research design. Next important thing is the experimental research. Why we study in the field of physical education and what is used in this field of physical education. The important in the field of physical education, which make it one of the most valuable approach in a sports sciences. Experimental research help us to test a training method and exercise program in a scientific proper way. Instead of relying on assumption and old patterns, we can practically apply our training or treatment and observe actual effect on the athlete, and then we can apply to getting the better results. Next important thing, the evaluate sport performance and improvement techniques. It also help to evaluate the sport performance and technique. So through the experimental research, we can evaluate the performance and find out the factor which will affect of the performance, and we can predict the future performance of the athlete. The study of just like responses to the exercise, because the field of physical education, the study of physical activities, the response of physiological response of physical activity, response of biomechanical response to the physical activities. Through experiment, we can understand how body responds to different type of physical activity, how body mechanics is response in a different type of the physical activities, such is in just like physiological response, heart rate, muscles activation, movement efficiency during physical activity. We go for the biomechanical parameters, kinetic parameters, kinematic parameters, how all these parameters is response to different type of physical activities. Next is the improved coaching strategies and sports science knowledge. The coaches, physical educator can design better training program which based on scientific evidence, leading to improve the performance and reduce the risk of injury. So in that case, the experimental research plays a very important role. Thank you very much, my dear learner. Now we conclude of this session or experimental research design. The experimental research is a highly scientific, systematic method that enables the researcher to establish clear cause and effect relationship through manipulating and control the different kind of the variables. It's a play crucial role in the field of physical education and sports sciences by testing training method, evaluating the performance, and understanding the different responses of the body responses to the exercises, like physiological response to the exercise, psychological response to the exercise, biomechanical response to the exercise. With its structure design, use of control group, experimental group, emphasize on accuracy, experimental research, uh, provides the reliable and evidence-based research instead of assumptions and the old concepts. So therefore, it is an essential approach for improving the coaching practices, enhancing the athletic performance, and advancing the scientific knowledge in the field of physical education and sports sciences. Thank you very much, my dear lab.